As we head into the busy international recruiting season, you may be asking yourself, what is the current state of international school hiring? Whether you're a seasoned veteran of international education or starting to build your foundational knowledge, this episode is for you. We're excited to welcome Diane Jacoutot, the director of Edvectus, a leading international recruiting company, to answer pressing questions that go deeper than the usual approaches to recruiting. Diane shares what has changed, which is a great deal, and what remains constant in the ever-changing landscape of international recruitment. We'll explore key strategies that Diane recommends for educators and school leaders to successfully navigate their global career and staffing journeys. Diane describes how Edvectus offers specialized pathways tailored to British and Irish, U.S. and Canadian, New Zealand and Australian educators, along with subject-specific opportunities, providing a comprehensive approach to recruitment. As timing is crucial in international recruitment, we discuss how both schools and candidates can better align with the recruitment calendar to maximize success. Additionally, we highlight an important and growing trend in international hiring practices, increasing diversity and inclusivity in recruitment efforts. Most importantly, Diane emphasizes a vital mindset for educators entering the space to adopt. Your first international job is just the beginning, the essential first step up the ladder of international schools. This episode was recorded on September 2nd, 2025. Whether you're launching your international career or aiming to move to the next level, this episode is packed with valuable insights to help you go global with confidence. We now give you Diane Jacoutot, who, with a straightforward, candid style, cuts through the noise to give you an unfiltered view of international recruiting.
Hi, Diane. Welcome to the Educators Going Global podcast. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Happy to be here. Really thrilled to be here.
Wonderful. So one of our first questions to our guests, because this being an international education podcast, is where in the world are you? So where in the world are you, Diane?
Where in the world am I? I am in the UK, and I'm halfway between London and Cambridge in a tiny little village, and my home office looks on a 11th century church. So if it goes off during our podcast, maybe you'll be able to hear it.
It sounds idyllic.
Thank
you for setting the scene so beautifully. So, Diane, you have been working with international educators for a while, so we're wondering if you have a going global story that you could share with us.
I do. Probably one of my favorite experiences in this role. And I will say that my role as an international recruiter allows me to travel to many different countries and see many, many different schools. One of
Envious.
I know. I do travel coach, so that might make you feel a little less envious. But one of my favorite experiences was when I was working with a new group of schools in Kazakhstan. And this was probably 10, 15 years ago. And they were new to the international market. It was government schools that were built to educate the best and the brightest of Kazakhstan. And they were boarding schools so that they could take children from anywhere in Kazakhstan. They would have 100 applications for every place. So they approached us and they needed help recruiting foreign teachers. They had never done that before. So I went to Kazakhstan and I was trying to think of how could I successfully recruit here, right? So Kazakhstan, at that point, you have to remember that Borat was probably the only thing that anybody knew about Kazakhstan, right?
Not much.
It was not much, which is, not much factual, let's say. And so I thought, well, let me take my trusty camcorder with me. And because pictures speak 1,000 words, right? So I go there and I meet with the client, and we're talking about international recruitment. And I thought, let me go across the street. There was a shopping mall across the street, and I'm going to take some videos so that I can show people, like, you're not in a gulag. You're not, eating goats. There's a supermarket and there's a shopping mall. So I go across to the shopping mall, and I'm with my camcorder, and I'm camcording my way through the shopping mall. And I see the security guard rushing to me, right? So he was actually quite friendly considering, but he's like, no, yet. So I put my camcorder away, and I asked the school later what happened, and he kind of escorted me out. He kind of, nicely chucked me out of the shopping mall. Turns out that there was a KGB office in the shopping mall. The fact that I didn't get arrested, I think, was a credit to the people of Kazakhstan.
I was thinking that's where the story was going.
No, they just said, you got to stop. And what I learned from that, and I did actually go on to video some other things. I videoed supermarkets and, driving around. Just, you have to ask permission. Just ask permission before you do it. So yeah, that's my going global story. It was a real eye opener. I loved Kazakhstan. I loved recruiting for them. It was a great opportunity for the right kind of teacher who doesn't mind the cold and who has a real tolerance for uncertainty. So that I loved that whole project. That's one of my favorite travel experiences.
Oh, that's a great story. Thank goodness you got away without being sent to the gulag.
I know. I wouldn't be here.
Well, Diane, I've just got to say, there wasn't a sign that said KGB or us right there telling you?
Yeah.
I mean, it might have, but I don't read Russian or Kazakh.
There's that. It would have been in Cyrillic, wouldn't it?
It would have been in Cyrillic. Oh, my. All righty. So in preparing for this interview, and we've been connecting with Diane, she wrote a blog post for us a ways back. We know that she has so much information and so much wisdom to share. We're going to do 2 shows. So this is the first one. And I just wanted to let people know that the second one will be about first-timers coming to international school recruiting and what they can experience. So be ready for that second show. And for this show, our guiding question is, what is the state of international recruiting? How does your company, Edvectus, support both educators and schools, especially with hiring for diversity? So you're really in a very interesting niche, and we've been looking to get you on the show for a long time. So let's start unpacking that guiding question with some sub-questions. And let's start with, what aspects of the international recruiting process haven't really changed that much in the last 5 or so years per se?
Yeah. So I've been recruiting international teachers now for over 20 years. So I've seen changes, right? Probably the one aspect that hasn't changed in the recruiting process is really almost the guiding principle of recruiting, which is matching. It's matching teachers to international schools. And like many things, it sounds simple, but it's so complex because you've got to match the needs of the teacher, the education of the teacher, the requirements of the school, what the school are doing, what curriculum they're using, where it is, what the Ministry of Education requirements are to get a visa for that teacher to go to that school. And so at the core of any recruitment process is matching, right? So that can never change. But what has changed is almost everything else.
Yeah.
In my 20 years, I mean, when I started, we would recruit teachers, we put an ad in the newspaper and they would phone you, right? I remember getting an airmail letter with a handwritten CV, a handwritten resume. And that, that's just what you did. So yeah, everything else has changed.
With what hasn't changed, and when it comes to the school angle of it, and from their perspective and trying to hire people, what's it like for schools as they're looking out? I guess the numbers of applicants have been going up, and the number of applicants been going up. outside the main, we call them the passport countries, the US, Canada, Britain, etc. What does that picture look like from their perspective?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And it actually has implications for the recruitment process from the eyes of the teacher. So nowadays, most schools will post their jobs online, right? So they'll put them on their own website, they'll put them on job boards, they'll give them to recruiters. So jobs are there globally. And what happens, and you can put as many requirements in that job description as you like. But what will happen is you will get probably 90% of the applications that you get are absolutely nothing to do with the job that you're recruiting for. So I can say in a job description, you must have American curriculum experience. You must have a license to teach. And we will get applications from all over the world, people just trying their luck.
Wow.
I heard anecdotally that there's companies in places like India and Africa that will charge the candidates a fee and just make application after I'll make 100 applications for you, Mr. Teacher. And they pay them a fee and then they just make these spurious applications, which hurts absolutely everybody. So the schools, the recruitment agencies, the job boards are just inundated with applications that don't have anything to do with their job. So that's task number one, is you've got to sift through them. And you can often throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? So, talking about diversity in recruitment, that is one of the implications, is that sometimes these schools will judge by name because they're like, oh, there's, applicant from a country that I don't, recruit from. And if you happen to have a similar name to that, they might overlook you for Joseph Smith. So, yeah, I think really it's an interesting minefield for schools. So what some of them started doing was they started putting in, killer questions, right? So you say, well, do you have a teaching license from the US and do you have US curriculum experience? And you can ask as many questions as you want. A lot of these job boards will do that. But the problem there is that the people just say yes. And it puts a barrier to entry to the qualified candidates because you're like, you know what, I'm just going to apply over there because they're not asking me 15 questions that I just don't have time to answer because I know I'm a qualified teacher, right? So the ones that you want sometimes won't make it over the hurdle and the ones that you don't want will. So it has actually changed. The fact that jobs are online has changed the face of recruitment for everyone.
So that's incredible to hear that there are these middle people and maybe even some kind of bots that are going to flood the zone, what a term we use in the US so much now, towards these schools. And one of the big trends we hear about is trying to have more diversity, but this is going to defeat it in a lot of ways, from what I'm hearing you say.
Yeah, in a lot of ways. I mean, one of our new services that we've started in the last 2 or 3 years is because we are professional recruiters, we know what we're doing. We actually go in and we will long list for our clients, right? So we will go in and take all of those applications and look at every CV. And because we do this 365 days a year, we can look at it quickly and know whether that person is qualified or not, but we look at everyone. So it is a way right now to be able to manage that. But I mean, I do think maybe AI in the future could be tuned to read CVs and then know what good looks like. But education CVs are actually quite unique in their resistance to use AI to be able to figure out what this person can do and is qualified to do.
So you've touched on some things that have changed about the recruiting process in recent years. Would you care to tell us a few more of the aspects of recruiting that have changed? Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, there's so much that's changed. So to give you some examples, the rise of video interviewing. So when I started in this, 20, 25 years ago, it was all in person, right? Schools would come to an event, the teachers would come to the event, and then they would meet each other and, have an interview and then get a job offer. And really, I would say that is now only true for 10% of schools. Most of them, because video conferencing has gotten so good that it's much more time effective and cost effective for them to do a video interview. Now, some of them might do a video interview and then come in person and meet. But the fact is that with the rise of international schools, there are now so many educators who are on the market in a school in Kazakhstan who cannot make it to a job fair in Iowa. So these international schools can access these teachers who are already on the market. And so it does kind of enable them to see a wider pool of candidates. So that's one big difference. I remember when we first started using Skype, and that was a big deal. And it would drop, when you'd hear somebody, you couldn't hear the sound or the video would freeze. And now it's really, really good. Another change, which I am absolutely 100% behind, is safeguarding. So there was a big case back about 10 years ago that some of the teachers, some of your listeners might be aware of, where there was a pedophile who had been on the international market for quite some time and did a lot of damage. And some good did come of that, where a lot of the quality international schools instituted really strong safeguarding. And so teachers now need to be able to provide confidential references from their heads, from their principals. Whereas in the past, you could just have a letter on letterhead, which obviously could be forged. And so those aren't really worth the paper that they're written on. So now there's a lot more in terms of police checking, reference checking from people that you can verify who they are. All of that has changed, and we are 100% behind that. So that is one really good change. With the rise of video interviewing, now we get demo lessons. So, rather than going to a fair where you just sit in a hotel room and talk to the head, a lot of schools now say, well, can you show yourself teaching? Or can you teach me? I'll give you a topic and you teach me as a child. The state schools in the UAE do this. They have a 5-minute demo lesson where where the interviewers actually behave as naughty children.
Nice.
There's always one who's delegated to be the naughty child, and they want to see how the teacher pulls it back. So that's one thing that's changed, and I think we can see more of that in the future. I think the teacher shortage, there is a huge teacher shortage from many countries, especially the countries that we consider kind of the Western US, UK, Ireland, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. These countries have teacher shortages of their own, whereas the number of international schools has risen dramatically. So the supply and demand equation has really gone out of kilter. And so the effect that it has had on the recruitment process is schools are moving earlier. It's a little bit weird. Like you're a teacher and you might rock up to your first job in China in August and September. And then in October, they're asking you for your renewal intention for next year.
Exactly.
And so you've only been there for a month and a half, and they're saying, well, what about next year? And I realize that that's difficult for these teachers, but at the same time, it's a necessity now because the recruitment season is now from October through June and July. We don't get a break anymore. Whereas it used to be just nothing would happen in the autumn. And now it's all going on. So that's another change in terms of the timing of the vacancies. I think another interesting thing is when you look at the international school market from 20 years ago till today, 25 years ago till today, back 25 years ago, there was about 2,500 international schools, and about 80% of them were not for profit. So they were the schools that if, your dad worked for, I don't know, Motorola or Shell, you would be posted to Malaysia, and you'd put your child into this not-for-profit school in Malaysia. So they would be foreign schools for foreign children in a foreign country using a foreign curriculum. And there was 2,500 of them. Today, there's over 15,000 of them. And 80% of them are not only for-profit, but 80% of them have host national children. And so that changes who you're recruiting and how you're recruiting. So they're not just these not-for-profits with eye-watering salaries, hiring just a handful of teachers a year. They're hiring lots of teachers. Salaries are all over the place because you have some mid-range schools, you have some high-end schools. Some of them are for-profit, some of them are not-for-profit. The children, you need to have EAL skills, regardless of where you go, because you're not in a British school for British kids with British teachers. So that's a real change. And with that comes parental expectation. So if you're a host national, you're shelling out good money whether it's a moderate fee paying or not, you're shelling out good money in Indonesia to put your kid in this school. And so you want something from it. And what they want is a good education. And their viewpoint of what a good education is might be different than ours. So coming from America, coming from the UK, we're really big into holistic education, aren't we? You know, raising good people and mental health and in all of this, right? And that isn't quite the same when you're a Chinese parent or an Indonesian parent or a Saudi parent. You're not thinking that way. You're thinking you want your child to get good grades so that they can go to a good university and get a great job at the end of the day. And so when you're interviewing, when you're recruiting, you're having to take into account the needs of the school and the expectations of the school and meshing it with this cultural divide because the needs of the teacher and the expectations of the teacher are quite different. I think, you know, something else that's changed over the past, this has been probably the past 3 years, is that the goals of the teachers coming onto the market has changed quite dramatically in that when I started this, the teachers that we would interview were going for a cultural purpose, right? They wanted to see the wider world. They wanted to live in a different culture. It was quite, I'm not going to say altruistic because it's not always altruistic, but it was, I don't know, in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it was kind of, you know, lower down. And nowadays, 90% of the teachers are going for financial reasons, right? They need to make money. Why? Because the housing costs in all of these source countries have gone through the roof. The cost of living is astronomical. So 25 years ago, you could buy a house on a teacher's salary in your home country. That's not true anymore. It's not true unless you get a bunch of money from your parents or win the lottery. So teachers are having to go abroad for different reasons. And yes, they probably want that cultural experience and they want to live a different lifestyle and see the world. Of course they do. But they're looking for a real goal. They are serious about what they want to achieve. And they're coming in with that expectation. So that's another thing that's changed.
Does this mean there is the possibility for negotiating one's salary? Back in the day for Audrey and myself, that you couldn't do that. You would never. Whatever the offer is, they show you the scale if they show you the scale. But I wonder now, is it the case where some of these young teachers or maybe kind of middle-aged teachers are trying to negotiate if they can? You know, you got to read the room. What's your take on that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. What we find is that, and I'll use the terminology that we see on the forums, which is a top tier school. So we'll talk about the top tier school, which are maybe those original kind of not-for-profit schools, those top fee paying schools, right? The big ones. Those you cannot negotiate. They have a very transparent structure in terms of pay. And we support that 100%. We think that is the way to go. Because what will happen if you don't is that somebody who happens to have better negotiation skills is teaching the subject alongside you and they're getting paid 20% more. And that inevitably backfires. So yes, we will see some negotiation, and it tends to be the mid-range schools who might want to be punching above their weight in terms of the kind of teacher that they can hire. But what I personally find is that you can throw a little bit of money at something, but if the fit isn't right, the fit isn't right. So I encourage teachers to maybe be considered about it, to look at, when you look at savings, you have to look at the cost of living. You're not just looking at salary. You know, you can have a teacher make the same money in Dubai as they would in Nanjing, China. But the cost of living in Nanjing, China is 30% less than Dubai. So you're saving 30% more. So if you only look at salary, you're doing yourself a disservice. So yeah, I think you can try to negotiate, but you have to go very carefully and you have to be able to accept that if you're in a better tier school, a more expat cultural school, they're going to have a scale and they can show you the scale.
Yeah, so we've talked with Andrew Hallam, the millionaire teacher author. You may have heard of him. And one of the things he suggested was go to the website called Numbeo, and it can give you a pretty accurate estimate of the cost of living in a variety of countries. So that's one suggestion I would make, following on to what you just talked about.
Yep. There's another one as well that we use. We like Numbeo a lot. And there's another one called Expatistan.
Oh, that's awesome.
Those two are great. And so, yeah, it does depend on how many people input data. So if you are talking about the back end of Beyond, we have a school in a place called Alula in Saudi. Cost of living there, I can assure you, is very low, but I don't think you're going to find it on Numbeo and Expatistan because there's just not many expats there.
Right. So you'd have to dig a little deeper. But I mean, that's a question you can certainly ask in your interview for sure.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. So, Diane, I'm gathering that you've actually spoken to teachers in some detail about what their motivation is. And I hear you saying that for 80% or so of teachers, it's now financial. And I agree that for a lot of teachers, that's the case. I'm wondering if you've heard anyone saying that the state of education in their home country is just too challenging. I know I've heard about US teachers saying this, and I know I've heard this from Kiwi teachers and from UK teachers. So I'm just wondering to what extent you hear that as a reason for going overseas.
Yep, I do hear it. We do a survey of about 500 teachers every year. And we ask them, one of the questions is, what are your motivations for going abroad? And yes, the job itself is a motivator. I think, are they going abroad because they want a better life? Yes, they absolutely are. I think that's very multifaceted. So what we're seeing here in the UK, for instance, is that teachers are leaving the profession.
Exactly.
Right. And I think that is people just getting fed up. And what we hope to do is capture them before they pull the plug on it and give up on teaching altogether and be able to let them know that actually you can have a much better experience if you go abroad. I mean, there are countries around the world where teachers are revered, culturally revered. China is a really good example where education is so important culturally that if you're a teacher, and you see the parent on the street, they will cross the street and wave to you and say hello because you're actually a valued commodity. So I think teachers maybe don't know how much better it is abroad. And I hope to spread that message. So I think initially they might think about the financial aspects, but I think they won't come back to the home country and teach for those reasons that you mentioned.
Yeah, well, and we do know people who have gone back and have been really frustrated, and even a few who have pivoted back into international education, my husband for one. But yes, I'm so glad you said that that's kind of perhaps mission part of your raison d'etre, if you will, is that you would like people to see that there is another option rather than just throwing in the towel completely on teaching. If it's your passion, if it's your calling, this is an option.
Absolutely.
And that is part of kind of our mission too. That's our raison d'etre too. Yeah.
I hasten to add that teaching abroad is not without its challenges. You are trading off one challenge for another, right? So you're not going to ride off into the sunset, into paradise on a stick. There are going to be, teaching abroad is not necessarily easy. You're going to have to assimilate to a new culture. Your school, you've never been there. You don't really know what it's like. The children come from a different culture. There's cultural minefields everywhere that you're going to have to navigate. But the actual teaching is going to be a joy, and the cultural bridges that you will need to cross to be effective in that country will actually make you, I believe, a better person.
And I will just add that the people you'll be surrounded with tend to be like-minded thinkers as well. And
Absolutely.
So that's another feature, they're people who are just excited about teaching and about professional development and about collaboration. And it just goes on, the sort of side benefits, if you will. So thank you for clarifying that part.
So that's a little bit of a teaser for our second show, because on our second show, we're going to talk about first-timers. And not just young teachers, but maybe people middle career, end of career, that might not have as many choices in schools. So they might end up at schools where there are more negatives than they would like. And that's what's happening out there. You and I were talking off mic about getting on Reddit and other forums, and reading the stories of people that have struggled. And right, like this week, I've been reading about people struggling in different jobs. They've only been in the job for a couple of weeks, if that much. So we'll get into that on the second one. And you've shared so much helpful information, not just for people looking to go overseas the first time, but also for veterans. And this is another theme of ours, is that veterans, you've been around the block, but the block has changed a lot. So upskill, up knowledge, and you can do it through people like Diane with her company and continuing to listen to Audrey and maybe me a little bit. All right.
I hope so.
Okay, let's broaden this a little bit because this episode will come out at the start. Well, like you're saying, recruiting is just like year round, but into the fall here in the Northern Hemisphere. So what are some general recruiting strategies that you share with your educator clients and then with your school leader clients? So maybe let's start with the educators.
Yeah. So they're actually intertwined. So let me start by saying, when I talked about schools coming earlier to the market, right? So when they come earlier to the market, they are going to the market to try to pick the teachers who are absolutely best suited. They're trying to get the pick of the litter, right? So they're coming out to market and they're saying, I'm a British school. What am I looking for? I'm looking for a teacher who knows the British curriculum. So I want to see good educational outcomes on their CV, on their resume. I want to see what those teachers have led to the attainment of their students, because that's what I'm looking for. What they're not looking for is a teacher who doesn't have that curriculum experience, who might be an absolutely fabulous teacher, but they are going early to the market to get what they want. They will get more flexible as time goes on. So one of the things that I tell our teachers, our candidates, and they just need to understand, is that timing is everything. So we have, for instance, we have a real strong presence in South Africa. We recruit a lot of South African teachers. And South African teachers, by and large, don't have British or American or IB curriculum experience. So they'll be coming to us now saying, well, look, I want a job. I see that job in China. I want that job in China. I can do the British curriculum. I know I can. Our curriculum's related. But we have to say, look, you don't want to apply now, because if we apply now, you're going to get a no. They're going to say no, and they won't. Then it's harder for us to get a yes later. So we have to actually guide them on timing, because once they get into their system as a no, all of these big schools have applicant tracking systems. So once you get in as a no, it's really, really hard to become a yes. So timing is everything. And, it's really the same for the schools. The schools will come. We work with a school in, believe it or not, Benghazi.
Wow.
In Libya. And they came to us. They said, we are a British curriculum school and we want British teachers. And they came to us in May. And we said, firstly, May is a really bad time to be looking for British teachers because they're all locked into contracts. Okay. So the British system means that if you don't give notice by the end of May, you cannot give notice. You cannot even start a job until later in the next academic year. So that's point A. But point B is you need to know your place in the market. Just like this South African teacher wanting a British school, you need to know what you're going to get and what you're not going to get. We had to say to the school in Benghazi, look, I think it's really unlikely, given the teacher shortage in the UK and your salary and your location and the number of competitors that you have in more glamorous locations, I think it's going to be really difficult for us to find you a British teacher. But let us find you a teacher who is primed and ready to learn the British curriculum, who wants to learn it. They have the subject knowledge. And let us introduce you to some of those people. And that's who they hired. So I think the first thing is timing and to know your place in the market. And it's a really hard thing to do. It's hard to know what you don't know about. And that's why I'm here, is people don't know. The schools don't know about the rest of the market, and the teachers don't know about where they fit. So that, I think, is one of the main things that we let people know. You're on the Reddit forum, I'm on the Reddit forum. You see, I want a top tier school and I have 1 year experience. I'm really sorry, but you got to take a number and stand in line, because there's teachers with 7, 8, 9 years of experience who are in the queue ahead of you, and they're going to get picked and you're not. So you do need to know your competition a little bit.
I want to unpack this for a wonderful couple that we've interviewed, and their episode's going to be up soon. But what you just said is worth the price of admission regarding timing, regarding the educator and the school. And it's like a dance that I really appreciate that. Get the yes later when the market has changed, the supply isn't as high, and maybe they're a little bit more needy and they're open to be more flexible. That says so much that I didn't realize. I haven't been in the ball game in a long time, and that your company so personalizes what they're offering for the schools and what they're offering for the candidate. So that is huge. So just jump into the timing. I've picked up a little bit from talking with different association leaders we've had on the show from different parts of the world. So let's say you've got a couple that's one day going to be a power couple, and they've got a lot of experience. They're head of the ball game. They're sharp, and they might want to be in South America, but they're going to be smart. They're going to look at Asia. They know the pay is going to be better, and they might get a chance to get a job at a really good school. How is that timing going to work? Let's say they get that offer from that Asian school, and they've just started to hear from that very nice school in South America. How do you put that together?
Oh, that is such a good question, because that happens to almost everybody. It always happens. And you know what we advise teachers is you just have to look at each offer as it comes and decide yes or no. And I know that's really hard. It's like playing poker in a way, because you don't know what the hand is you're going to be dealt, right, in the next round. But what you don't want to do is back out. So we do have people who, are candidates of ours who will do that. They'll shop around. They'll accept an offer, and then a better offer comes along, and then they're like, oh no, I'm going to back out. We don't work with those people, because we need to look at the bigger picture. And that school has stopped recruiting because you have said yes. And they have now passed over how many candidates that they could have hired. And they've put money probably into trying to get your visa. So it's not fair. So I do say to teachers that you need to make a tough decision sometimes. And there is this psychological thing called buyer's remorse. We've all dealt with it. Every time I buy a computer, it happens. I buy a computer and I think I got the best deal. And then the next week I get a flyer for an even better computer. Yeah. It's just a thing. And that will happen to probably every teacher who accepts a job, because you are then imagining that not only is that perfect job out there, that you're going to get that job, right? You don't know that you're going to get that job because you're up against another 5 or 6 or 10 people. So you just have to take each one. And if you make a commitment, you need to stick to it.
All right, let's do one more quick scenario real quick. Let's talk about specialists in very sought after disciplines. You're a physics teacher, you're a higher level math teacher, and let's throw in maybe your spouse is an elementary teacher. So what does that look like that schools are really going to go after that couple? Am I correct? They're going to really want that physics teacher.
Yeah, absolutely. Teaching couples are quite highly sought because now keep in mind, we said 80% of schools are for profit, right? Teaching couples are cheaper for the school. You get one set of housing. They tend to last longer, especially teaching couples with kids. There's more people to get unsettled in the beginning, but once they get settled, they stick. So schools do seek teaching couples, and they will compromise sometimes. If you have, inevitably, there'll be one partner who's a little bit stronger than the other. The difficult ones are when you have, let's say, a teaching couple and you're both art teachers, right? So if you had a specialist subject and a primary teacher in an international school, there's more primary jobs, right? And there's more English jobs, there's more math jobs, the core subjects. There's fewer PE jobs, there's fewer music, there's fewer art, there's fewer drama, because those are subjects that not every child might take. So you don't have multiple teachers. Those are the difficult ones. So for teaching couples, I would say you want to go to the market early and you want to cast a fairly wide net, because you have to now balance the needs of two. We did just have an awkward scenario where we had a teaching couple and they interviewed for a school and one passed the interview and the other failed. And so, it does happen. Somebody might be a fit, somebody might not be a fit. And so, that teaching couple is left with the choice. Does the one spouse go for the job and we try to find the other one a job nearby, or do they wait? Do they hold and wait? So it isn't an easy thing, but it is, I think teaching couples are sought within reason.
So I'm curious now, when you talk about the difficulty of having maybe potentially multiple offers, or one is further along than another, and one's a solid offer, whereas one is you've made it to the second or third interview or something like that. When we used to go to the in-person recruiting fairs, that could happen, but the time frame was a little easier to manage because you needed to maybe, let's say, tell them by the end of that weekend where the fair was, or maybe by the end of the week or whatever, but you had those potentially multiple offers within a shorter time frame, and so you had the opportunity to compare and contrast them and make a decision. So because of that, would you say that going to in-person fairs, and maybe for other reasons, that going to in-person fairs, even though you said they're maybe less popular than they used to be because of the cost effectiveness of the video interview, would you say it's still worth going to the in-person fairs?
I mean, I don't know how much they cost a teacher, right? So if you do have a need to be able to balance multiple offers, then yes, I suppose it would be a good thing. But the world is moving, and I'm hearing fewer and fewer. Many of our clients are dropping the fairs just because it's not just the cost of going to the fair, it's the time out of the office. So I know, I know on the other hand, there are clients that like to go to the fairs, client schools that like to go to the fairs because it's a bit of a boondoggle for them. They get to hobnob with their bros and have drinks in the evening, and sometimes they're job shopping themselves. I will put that out there, that they are looking for their next job. So they have an ulterior motive in going. But the schools that look at it purely from a financial standpoint, because there is a teacher shortage, at these fairs, you get more schools than teachers, more and more every year. And so the schools, if they're looking at the pure cost effectiveness of it, are saying, actually, it's not worth it. So if you put all your eggs in the fair basket, you may end up with 2 or 3 job offers, but that is a subset of what is out there. So it's swings and roundabouts, as we say here in the UK. It's, you got to choose your poison. And if you go the virtual route, you will most likely end up having to make a choice each one as it comes. It's asynchronous by definition, whereas the job fairs, you're going to get a different subset of the market, but yet you could be able to make that choice at the same time.
On to a little bit of a different topic. First of all, I love the name Edvectus and its meaning of teach and afar, and you've combined. That's right up my alley of really cool, creative names. We see at your Edvectus website /portal that you offer a variety of approaches for your clients, in that there are different pathways for British and Irish, US and Canadian, New Zealand and Australian educators, and also different pathways based on their subject area. So how does the advice and approach vary by nationality and subject and level?
Yeah, that's a good question. So yeah, just an aside, when I was naming Edvectus, I have some amazing investors. When I decided to start the company, I got investors and they've been absolutely brilliant. And the one investor said, when you choose a name for your company, he said, choose something that nobody else has. You can make it up. The meaning will be what you make it. And he said, the other piece of advice I'm going to give you is make sure it's on the top half of the alphabet. Because when you're listed, in a, you go to a conference, you're going to be at the top of the list. So I ended up buying a whole bunch of foreign language books. And as you might have guessed, Latin was the winner, where I came up with the combination. And I had to make sure that the website wasn't taken. So that's how I did that. But back to your question.
I'm just going to say quickly here that to me, it made me think of Invictus.
Yeah.
So I thought it might be something along those lines of the sort of stand and deliver kind of thing, So,
yeah,
anyway,
no, that wasn't, no, because that's not me. I'm not an Invictus kind of person. Yeah, it was really just, I wanted something meaningful, but I love a secret meaning. And that was kind of, you have to, I love things that you have to unpeel. Mm-hmm. And that was why it appealed to me.
Mm-hmm. Works for me.
Yeah. So to answer your question about the different pathways, one interesting aspect of this work is that we deal with clients, as I said, who might not be as experienced in international recruitment. And so we're talking to, let's say, a British school in, I don't know, Saudi, and they say, we only want British teachers, right? Because we're a British school, we only want British teachers. And we say, well, what about Irish teachers? And they're like, yeah. Irish teachers. Sure. So when I created those pages on the website, I actually put them together because the clients tend to lump them together. So it's the same with the US. They'll say, oh, we're a US curriculum school. We want US teachers. And I say, well, what about Canadians? And yes, yeah, sure. Yeah. Same. Which they're not, by the way. But
No.
So
as a Canadian, I'm just going to say, no.
I know. And nor are Australians and New Zealanders.
Yeah.
But from an international schools perspective, they tend to lump them together because there's an affinity, at least in their mind. So what I tried to do with our advice to these teachers is to explain to them that if you are a British or Irish teacher, you might think you want to go to an American curriculum school, but you really need to think about it, because the school culture is going to be different. The curriculum is different, and you don't know what you don't know. And you are going to be in for a struggle. Likewise, if you're an American or Canadian teacher, Canadians less so because they are a Commonwealth country. So they're going to have a little bit more of an inkling about the British curriculum. But for a US teacher, we do have, for instance, a client in Southeast Asia. They're an Australian school. And they did tell us, look, we know that American teachers have a lot of trouble assimilating to our school culture, to the curriculum. It is just such a different environment that if you are going to put forward an American, they really need to be screened quite effectively because we don't know that they're going to fit. So what I did with those pages is also try to explain to the teachers in these different countries how, as I said, teachers are coming for money. They have a financial motivation. They have a career. Teachers in their 20s nowadays, and this is a cultural thing, are quite serious about what they're doing. They're not going for a champagne brunch in Dubai anymore. That used to be the case. With the teachers 10 years ago, they wanted that champagne brunch. Nowadays, the majority of teachers aren't going for that. They are going for career. They're going for financial. They have goals. They're quite serious. So what I wanted to do with those pages was to break down a typical international school salary and explain to them why it is, how it is that you're going to save money when you're only making, when you look at it on paper and you're going, this is less money than I'm making now. So I break down to them, what are the tax implications? What are the real estate implications? The fact that you get free housing. What does that mean to your bottom line? And then the cost of living, which is the hardest thing to grasp. So I've actually taken Numbeo or Expatistan and I've said, okay, if you're going to make, I don't know, $2,000 a month in American money, what is your spending power in Cambodia? Right? And how it is that you're only going to spend $300 a month and you're going to bank the rest because the cost of living is so different. And that is a really hard thing for teachers to grasp. Even teachers who have been on the market, they get better when they're on the market because they kind of intuitively now know it. But yeah, the only way that I explain it to teachers who have never been abroad or worked abroad is, when you're at home and you go out for a burger, you know what that burger is going to cost, right? At your local diner. And then you go to Disney World, right? And that burger is, twice, 3 times the price?
Yeah.
That's the effect of the cost of living. So that's a real life, you can kind of grasp that the cost of living in Disney World it's 3 times the cost of living in Peoria. And that's what you need to try to grasp when you look at a job, because the cost of living in Japan is probably going to be higher than the cost of living in Nanjing or the cost of living in, Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. So you have to try to wrap your head around that. So that's what those pages we're trying to do, is to set the stage so that they can better evaluate the international job market.
Okay. And then you've got the part about the subject and level differentiation. How does that work?
Yeah. So with international schools, they are often bound by requirements to get a visa for you. So to work in a foreign country, you actually need to have a work visa. And so it's not like the same. You could go visit there and you can, just motor up without a visa on a plane, and that's fine. But to actually take a job, they have to actually say to the government that I need this teacher because I can't hire a local teacher with the same skills.
Right.
Because every country is looking out for their own, right? So with subject and level, you often have to match your background and experience, and licensing has to match the subject and level that you're teaching. And we're actually running into some real problems now in some countries where their requirements go far beyond what the source countries are producing. So for instance, in the UK, we've got and probably in the US as well, everywhere, we've got a shortage of STEM teachers. Right? Because STEM, if you have a STEM degree, you could go into industry and earn 5 times more than you would as a teacher, right? So why wouldn't you?
Yep.
So what a lot of these countries are doing is they're getting teachers with adjacent degrees, and even only slightly adjacent degrees, and they're topping up their subject knowledge, and then they're getting their teacher training that way. So you might have a teacher with an economics degree teaching maths. It's a teacher, let's say, with a business degree teaching science because they've gotten extra coursework. Well, the foreign countries, it's no comprende. They don't get that.
Yeah.
And so a lot of these countries, GCC, even it's, Indonesia, Brunei, like a lot of them are just looking at that degree and they're saying, I don't care how much experience this teacher has. You can't have them. They just don't meet the educational requirements. So there is that. And when we look at the nationality of the teacher and the training of the teacher, we have to look at the curriculum of the school. So as I said, schools that have a British curriculum want British teachers. That's, or at least British experienced teachers. Teachers have experience in their curriculum. They're a lower risk. When a school is hiring a teacher, they are investing time and money into getting you there. And they want you to be successful. And the way to lower that risk is that you have already proven yourself successful in that curriculum. So we are trying to match. Now, when you get to Australia and New Zealanders, there's not that many Australians curriculum schools. We do have some, but there's not that many. So Australians and New Zealanders are going to be applying for jobs that might be British or American. Right. So they just need to know that they might be less sought after. The beauty is, if you have IB, right? IB schools, International Baccalaureate, that is an international curriculum. It was developed to be international. And that's one thing I love when I walk into a really good IB school and you see all the colors of the rainbow in children and teachers, right? And you have a teacher from Zimbabwe teaching alongside a teacher from the US who is teaching with a teacher from Colombia. And those tend to be the really international schools, and I love them. So yeah, I think the advice that we give to teachers who don't have the curriculum experience is that you need to get on the ladder. So let's say, for instance, the South African teachers who want to get on the ladder. You don't shoot for the top from the beginning. You have to start maybe at a moderate fee paying school and you're going to earn less money, but you're going to get 2 years of American or IB or British or Australian curriculum experience. And then you make your application to the next rung up. And so you have to think 2 or 3 steps ahead. And this is true of your newly qualified teachers. You have to know where you sit on the ladder. And yes, you want to be in a top tier school. But if I placed you in a top tier school today, a newly qualified teacher, you would most likely sink. Because the expectation of the school and the expectation of the parents are far beyond what you are likely to be able to deliver that early in your career. So I'd be doing you a disservice if I placed you there. So you have to think of it as a ladder. That's how we coach our teachers, is you have to think, okay, the next rung, I'm going to get this experience. I'm going to learn. It's not going to be the perfect school. I'm going to be putting up with some crap. Yes. But the next school will be better. And then the next school after that will be better. And we've seen this happen. We had a lovely teacher from South Africa that we placed in a starter school. Then we placed her in an IB school. It wasn't the best IB school, but it gave her IB experience. And we placed her in a school in Oman, which was a better IB school. And she's moving her way up. And that's what I love to see.
Wow. I'm just so impressed. One, how you can turn a phrase. You're just like Audrey. She's so good with phrases of get on the ladder. And yeah, you are very good at that, my partner. So we're going to go deeper on just what you were covering right there. First timers, how to approach it, what's going to work, what's not going to work, and what's the long-term plan. And you said this off mic, ask any question, and you're just answering so many things and making me think. So here are 2 questions. One, because I'm in Bangkok, and there seem to be a lot of British schools here. Mm-hmm. My son, an American, is in a British school in Italy, and the only reason he's there is because they have IB. Mm-hmm. he had no British experience. But now he's morphed into a British American teacher, and that's probably going to open some doors. So with the British hiring, is it just like what you were talking about at the beginning? They're doing all the video conferencing and they're using some of the bigger recruiting agencies, and it's called the TES.
Yeah, Times Educational Supplement. Yep.
So how do British schools in general, how do they recruit? What does it look like?
How do British schools? Yeah, it's interesting because the kind of schools, the curriculum of the school often dictates where they go and how they go, because they're looking for the teachers that have that curriculum knowledge. So British schools will tend to, the Times Educational Supplement is the kind of the big one, right? It's not to say it's perfect. We hear a lot of complaints that, again, you're getting these spurious applications. The tool's not that easy to use. They got to sift through a million things to get to what they want. So they do. Some of the higher tier schools. So we work with a school called Tanglewood Trust, which is one of those original not-for-profit British schools in Singapore. And what we do for them is we do that long listing for them because they interview every teacher in person where possible. They will fly them in. They want to meet because they are that top tier school. They can afford it. So they want to meet those people in person. So we facilitate that in London. So we facilitate the day, they come in, they do an in-person interview, and they pay the teacher's expenses to be there. But that's the minority. That is the minority. So British schools, they will look for British curriculum experience. British and IB is a framework, right? You can lay that framework on any curriculum. And the British and IB together. So it's generally, you do the British primary, you do British GCSE, and then a lot of schools lay the IBDP on top of it. That is really popular. And so I would say, someone like your son who's got a couple years, if he's got good results in GCSE, if he's secondary, if he's got good results in GCSE and A-level, he should be putting those results on his CV, right? You got to show those results, what your kids have done. And that will get attention from British schools. And so that's part of the coaching that we do. I actually did a little video short, almost raging against teachers that are building these CVs that are job descriptions. It does my head in, where they just say, I worked in, the British School of Al Kabaret, and I marked papers and I went to parent conferences and, like, no, yeah. I know what the job of a teacher is. Tell me what difference you made. And so for your son, if he is a secondary teacher and he's got great results, he should post that front and center. And then I would look at some of the associations. So some of the better schools are part of these British associations like COBIS, the Council of British International Schools like FOBASIA, which is a Southeast Asian, East Asian one. A lot of the British schools do that because they'll have sports against each other. So they are part of these associations. And they get benefits like child protection checking and whatnot. So yeah, I think you can look there too. When we do a lot of work with British schools, tend to come quite early because they want what they want.
Well, that's helpful. Thank you. So let me go on in one more tangent. Another theme that we've picked up is that schools are trying to be more diverse and having more neurodivergent students. And I can only guess that's leading to trying to hire more learning support teachers. Is that another need that you're seeing? But I'm going to throw in there one more thing, because I could see a kind of a lower level school saying, yeah, your child is struggling with learning disabilities. She's been tested, all that. We can take care of your child, but they really can't. Mm-hmm. So I wonder what's going on with that.
Yeah, really good question. To answer the first part, we are seeing an uptick in needs for learning support teachers. Absolutely. And that's it's starting when the government is starting to dictate that you need to have these people. The tricky bit with international schools and neurodivergent children is that these children are often learning, because 80% are host nationals, they're learning in another language. And so it becomes very tricky to unpick what issues are learning difficulties and what issues are just acquiring English. So it's a tricky thing. And those early years teachers and early primary teachers, early elementary teachers have to be really skilled at unpicking this. So yeah, we are seeing that. Now, if you're in a for-profit school and your focus is more profit, right? It's a spectrum. And let's say that you really are just in it to make money, you might take in children regardless of need, and attempt to educate them. But the other thing that we're seeing, that I've seen across my whole career, is that culturally in a lot of these countries, because parents are paying a fee, they will keep their children home and maybe have them privately educated. It's, it reminds me of the US where I grew up in the 60s, when parents weren't, they would try to hide children who seemed a little bit different. And in a lot of these cultures, that's exactly what they're doing. So we are in a transitionary time where the governments, particularly if we look at the UAE, the government of the UAE has been really on the forefront in pushing education for special needs, education for neurodiversity across their people, across their schools. And they have dictated that schools have to have a special needs coordinator, that schools have to have trained special needs teachers. And so therefore it is happening. So I think in countries that are kind of on the forefront, you're going to see it happen almost by force. You will see it kind of across the world, but maybe at different levels of success. There's a great school that we work with in Kuwait, which is one of the best examples that I've seen. It's a moderate fee paying school. So they are not the richest school. Their salaries are not the highest, but they have built the most amazing special needs unit where they have, it's vocational training for, quite severe special needs. They have a kitchenette where they're teaching the children how to cook. They hire special needs teachers. They integrate them into the classroom where possible, into mainstreaming. They have teachers that do that work. It is a fantastic school. And I love placing teachers there and they've been there for a while. And they just, in the beginning, I guess they had that mission to do it. And so it's one of the better examples of it being successful. So yeah, there's some really good examples of it.
Well, that warms my heart, and it says a lot that some governments are involved, and it is very truthful with families and culture and kind of hiding the children as well. So let's continue with the diversity in another direction. How does Edvectus support diversity in hiring?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's something that we struggle with. So we are working in an imperfect world, right? So there are countries that we deal with where it is not illegal to discriminate. In fact, it's ingrained in law that, you can't get a visa for somebody who's over 52 if you're a primary teacher in Brunei, like you can't. And discriminating on color, isn't illegal. So we are dealing in an imperfect world. And as a company, we've really thought long and hard about how we deal with it, because we are in business, we are a for-profit company. We need to make money, but at the same time, we also have very high moral and ethical standards. So the way that we've decided to go about it is we have created a diversity policy that we send to all of our client schools when we first meet them. And the diversity policy says that we are a British company and we will not discriminate based on these factors. And we will send you the teachers that we feel are a match for you from an education, from an experience. We will not discriminate for you. And I know that there are some clients who will still only pick teachers who have a certain look. But I make it a point to send them all the teachers that I can, because I want them to see what they're missing. I want them to see that there are fantastic teachers out there that they are passing up, and they are picking the teacher who is less qualified because of the way they look. And I know that over time that will change, that it will change their mind. I've seen it happen. When we first started working in Dubai, back when I started my first company, and we had an office in Dubai, and they came back and they said, well, we can't hire teachers who look Asian. We're a British school, but we can't hire teachers who look Asian. That is no longer the case. That has changed. It took me about 7 years to place a Black teacher in Nigeria, in a Nigerian school.
No way.
Yes way. And so I am dealing in an imperfect world. And I know, it was really interesting to have that Nigerian school explain to me why they were hesitant to hire a Black teacher. And the reason was, firstly, it's the same old excuse. What will the parents think? But it was also that teacher, if they have a Nigerian background, their family will have come from a certain sect, a certain tribe in Nigeria. And there will be expectations that that teacher gives preference to students who come from unknowing. They don't even know, they don't know that this teacher was part of the family or part of the tribe or whatever. So that teacher is going to be put in an awkward position. So, it took a lot of work on our part to just keep pushing. And we do that in many different ways. So I'll give you an example. We got a report from a teacher that we had placed in a new client school in the Middle East. And there was a South African teacher who was a person of color. And they reported back that they found out that the white teachers are being paid more. Right? So as a company, we said, thank you for telling us, and we will be visiting that school. And because our mission is to teach, that is at the core of what we do. It's not just the teachers that we educate, it's the client schools. So I want to give that school the benefit of the doubt, and I want to go to that school and explain to them why this is a bad idea. Yeah. Right? It is a bad idea. And let's explain to them why it's a bad idea. And give them another chance, right? And see where it goes. So I am dealing in an imperfect world. I am dealing with cultures that don't have the same awareness of the benefits of diversity. And I am trying every single day to change that, one teacher at a time. But I can't. I know some teachers might be listening to this going, well, why didn't you just shut the door? Why don't you not work with that school? Mm-hmm. And if I did that for every client, I would have very few, because they're on a learning curve, because a lot of these schools are moderate fee paying. They've not been to the UK. They just think everybody from the UK looks like Mary Poppins. They don't know. And we have to educate them, and we have to give them a chance, just like you do with your students. You have to educate them. You have to present them with the knowledge and hope that they grasp it with both hands and learn. And part of me sending them every CV is I want them to learn. And they do. They do.
So really glad to hear you promoting diverse hiring. That's really awesome. Thank you for that. Following up on your efforts to support diversity in hiring, what's the state of what we might call geo-hiring, with schools looking beyond the usual countries that we've spoken about before? So looking at maybe Africa, subcontinent, Latin America, and so on.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it's something that I've been really happy to see. So I talked about the teacher shortage, right? So from 2000 to now, just to give you some statistics, the number of international schools has grown by over 500%. Okay.
Crazy.
I know. The number of teachers from those countries, US, UK, Australia, Canada, has grown by no more than 10%. So what's happened is the schools that pay the highest salaries in the most sexy locations, they are the ones who are snapping up the British and American and, in those teachers early season. And the schools that are more moderate fee paying in the less well-known locations, less glamorous locations, they're kind of left holding the bag. And so what we've been doing a lot of is matching them with the teachers who are maybe coming from countries like South Africa, from Jamaica, from Latin America, from many different parts of the world, and matching those teachers. They've got good subject knowledge, and we're saying, give this person a chance. So it's a win-win. They are getting a hardworking teacher who is doing their very best to learn the curriculum. And then that teacher is learning the curriculum and then being able to use it as a step on the ladder. So we are seeing more and more, and we're seeing teachers now on the circuit who have made it on the ladder and are now getting placed in their second, third, fourth school abroad. It's more difficult when we have people from countries that are not English-speaking, English lingua franca countries. That is much more difficult. So the Latin America tends to be a difficulty because their English, they're going to be judged on their English. Mm-hmm. So we're trying to do a little bit more in terms of getting voice notes from teachers or getting videos, introductory videos from teachers, so that the schools, they only have a limited amount of time to interview. And it's a risk if they're going to interview somebody from Colombia if they don't know that their English is really good. Even if they've worked in an IB school in Colombia, they could have been teaching in Spanish. And so they want someone who's teaching in English. So these introductory videos, I think, are a good way forward. And that's what we're trying to do a little bit more of. So we don't charge. I should hasten to add that we cannot work with every teacher in the world at Edvectus. We are a relatively small company, and we don't charge teachers a fee. So it's free to use our services.
Awesome.
But that means that we can only really work with the teachers that, because we are a small company, we don't have unlimited hours. We have to work with the teachers that we feel are best suited to our current client school base, because the schools are the ones that pay us if we find them a teacher that they hire. So that's why the website is as big and broad as it is, because I wanted to try to help every teacher the best way possible, but I might not be able to give personal service to a teacher, from Malawi if I don't know that they're going to be a match to the jobs that I have. But I want them to be able to go on the website and learn a bit and educate themselves and try to get themselves on the ladder, because the schools are paying me a fee to find them somebody. So they might not pay me a fee if that teacher doesn't have a little something that they want at that moment.
You're filling in so many gaps, I would say, in my thinking and my understanding of what's happening out with international schools. And like we said, in the next episode, we're going to take a little deeper dive on first timers and we use your terminology, getting on the first step of that ladder. So that's going to be our focus. So with wrapping up now, is there anything else you'd like to share on the topics we've talked about today?
Yeah, I would say for teachers, my least favorite teacher who applies to us is the one who comes in and says, yeah, I'll go anywhere. I'll teach, I'll go anywhere. I think you really need to do your research, because this is a commitment. That school are committing to you. Those children are waiting for you to get there, and they can't hire another teacher just like you and expect them to get on a plane tomorrow. So there's a lot at stake. So I think my one piece of advice would be to do your research, to research every school, to look at their website, to look at the country, to try to learn about the culture. YouTube is amazing. It's awash with videos where you can kind of get a sense of it. When teachers come to me and they say, I'll go anywhere, I'll say, okay, yeah. All right. How about, I've got a school in Abuja, Nigeria. Would you go there? I've got a school in Tajikistan. Would you go there? And so you just need to unpick yourself. You need to actually be honest with yourself and know yourself before you go abroad, because the last thing you want to do is make $1,000 mistake, because, it's not a good look. It's not a good thing for anybody.
Absolutely. I really appreciated earlier when you said don't back out. And so, doing the research ahead of time. And, like you said, everything's online now. It's not like it was back in the day where, I remember my husband and I were in Ethiopia and we were going to look for a job. And, all we had was the ISS booklet that talked about the different schools and, what they offered and such, like nothing else. Whereas now, like you said, there's YouTube, there's the subreddit that David was talking about, there's Facebook groups, there's even, LinkedIn, you can find more. And every school has a website. And then there's the International School Community platform where you can see, people's impressions of different schools. There's just so much out there that I agree with you that there really is no reason not to do some research and really start to kind of narrow down. And we actually, I'll just give a little plug for, we put together a blog post and also a spreadsheet that's all about profiling schools. And so you look at it and you think about, what are your no-goes? What are your preferred things? What are your criteria? And then you can plug in what each school has to offer, and you can start to do a little bit of narrowing down. So I really appreciate that final comment of yours. Would you please give us a bit of information about how our listeners might follow you if they want to learn a little bit more about the current state of international education recruitment?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, every teacher is welcome to register for free on our website and access our services. So, as I said, we don't charge teachers a fee. Not only is it illegal in the UK, we're not allowed to do it, but I also feel it's unethical. I don't.
Wow.
Teachers don't make enough as it is. I just think it's Anyway, so I'd say they can certainly register with us for our services. They can follow us. We have a Facebook page called Love Edvectus. We're big on LinkedIn, so they can connect with us on LinkedIn. We've got a page on LinkedIn, and we have an Instagram. So yeah, we're kind of all over the social media. We're talking about TikTok. I don't know how to do TikTok, So I'm going to need to hire somebody who does. But yeah, I think I do a newsletter out to our database. And I just sent one out yesterday, which did talk about, the first article in it was talking about what things are looking like for next year and where are the hot spots. And so if you get on our newsletter, you can subscribe on our website, then you can get those newsletters as well and just get the benefit of that.
Perfect. Thank you. There's a lot of ways they can find out more about you.
We're all over the place. Yeah.
Nice.
Most excellent. And now Audrey can rest assured that she's going to not hear me say anymore. We've got to find someone who can talk about the nitty gritty, someone who can tell us about maybe some things that are struggles, some aspects of international life that folks don't think about. And Diane, you have done that so well. And I'm so appreciative and I'm super psyched that we're going to do the next show talking about the first timers, whether they're in their 20s, 40s, or who knows, in their 50s. We'll maybe get into some of those visa laws and how to get on the ladder and what are different factors there. So thank you so much for visiting with us and bringing such a wealth of knowledge in for our listeners. Boy, howdy, I would definitely check out the Edvectus website.
Oh, thank you. It's been absolutely my pleasure. This opportunity has been amazing. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today on Educators Going Global.
You can find this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, and all the other usual suspects.
Please subscribe, like us, and leave a review on Apple and Spotify, and let your teaching friends know about us so we can grow our community.
Please reach out at educatorsgoingglobal@gmail.com and join our Facebook group, Educators Going Global, if you have ideas, comments, or wish to share a Going Global story of your own.
You can also find us on Instagram at Educators Going Global.
Please visit our website as well, www.educatorsgoingglobal.com. All our podcast episodes are on there by topic, along with blog posts, Going Global stories, and our ever-growing resource library. For now, this is Audrey
And David.
inviting you to travel,
Teach.
and connect with us.